What's up, guys? Welcome back to Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson. I'm Scott McNally. All of our programming is brought to you by you guys at Patreon. Thank you very much for helping to support our programming. We're also brought to you by Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. That's Scott's book at byobbcoach.com, or you can go to Amazon to get the hardcover. We're brought to you by STROM Sports Nutrition for those of you in the UK. We are brought to you by supplementsource.ca for those of you in Canada. Great deals that change week to week. And most importantly, our title sponsor is TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK to get some additional savings. Check out their new website. It's looking pretty solid, and look forward to a bunch of contests and stuff coming up here in the near future. Scott Stevenson, we have a fun topic today. We'll probably have a bunch of stuff. You guys are welcome in the live stream to throw in some questions, but we had gotten into a conversation on It's Just Bodybuilding about cardio, and we play this game, overrated, underrated, and is actual, like, signified, I'm getting on the treadmill, I'm doing my cardio, is it overrated? I said it's underrated, personally. And the reason I feel that way is because I remember when I got involved with bodybuilding, everybody was doing a lot of cardio, and it was mandatory. And nowadays, everybody counts steps. And a lot of people are like, hey, you don't really even need to get on a treadmill. I do 10,000 steps a day. That's plenty. And I found, though, that isn't exactly the same. Does it work? Absolutely. I used to walk my dog for cardio, and it worked for a lot of my contest prep, but there were times that I still needed to get in the gym, get on a treadmill, get my heart rate up, elevated and consistent. Scott Stevenson, is cardio overrated?
Dun, dun, dun.
Exactly.
It's all contextual. Right. The first thing, historically, it's so interesting what you said, because that happens with pretty much, you name it. We might talk about intra-workouts a bit today, and I'm doing actually on for any German listeners who are there. I'm about to switch to German, but I'm going to do a webinar on Thursday, which is Thanksgiving. Actually, I didn't realize it when we set it up, but it's early in the morning or in the day for me on intra-workouts.
Oh,
yeah, Ernährungstraining, and that one is it was like that came out of nowhere. Milos was doing it, Harlene was doing it, and then everyone was doing intra-workouts, and we got tons of intra-workouts, and now it's kind of like, do it, don't do it. So things come in and out of fashion, and that's happened with meat. I mean, I remember like Jordan was one of the people we paid very special attention to.
Jordan Peters.
Steps. Jordan Peters, exactly. And he talks about that, and I talk about it in my book, and now, like you said, it's like, well, that's kind of a substitute. So what happens, I think, just with so many things in bodybuilding, if you have success about something, you rant and rave about it. You tell everyone this is an alternative that I wasn't aware of beforehand.
Yeah.
I can just go out and walk the mall or do fun things. And that for me is a substitute for my cardio. That's not a representative average sample of what works for everyone in every situation. You don't hear about, like, okay, I tried that, it didn't work. Like, let me just tell you how I failed. I'm going to post everywhere on social media. This didn't work for me.
That's true.
Unless you're ranting about it, right? Unless you have a major complaint. But if it comes across as like, I made a mistake, or I did something that didn't work out for me, and I kind of feel like you wasted your time, which really it isn't. We don't like to brag about, so to speak, our failures.
Yeah.
So I think it's totally contextual. Calories are calories. You need to have a caloric deficit if you're going to drop body fat. So that's something that's there. And then there's at least like two factors, I think, that we're going to probably differentiate whether someone does better with just meat, with more steps, basically just more energy expenditure with the lowest intensity possible, which is going to basically be walking. I mentioned before we were talking about, there's actually a research article that came out about the soleus push-up, where people are bouncing their feet. People are just kind of like a little bit anxious, and they move around a lot. They talk with their hands. And I was saying, like, I remember in grade school, you're in class, or even in junior high, where everyone's just sitting at desks, or high school, and there was always that person like had the bouncy foot.
Yeah.
They're doing soleus push-ups the entire time. And that increases your energy expenditure. That can account for 200 or 300, 400 calories a day, perhaps, depending on how much the person moves around. I mean, just standing increases your energy expenditure versus sitting. This is why the standing desks can be helpful for people, just for low back pain, that sort of thing. But also, you just move around more, and you're expending energy just holding yourself up. So we've got a situation where some people it's about the calories. And if they do formal cardio, this interference effect, which we also talked about before I'm tying all the things we talked about before we started recording into this like one little monologue, can be really extreme for some people. People they do too much cardio, they lose their legs.
Yeah.
So they have to literally keep that interference effect out. If you look from a molecular basis, you do an endurance bout, you turn on a different set of genes. There's some overlap naturally. You turn on a different set of genes than you do when you do resistance exercise.
Yeah.
Endurance exercise doesn't put on muscle mass. Resistance exercise does. There's some exceptions to that, but generally speaking, you look at marathoners, you don't see endurance athletes with big muscles, exception being maybe cycling. And that's a different story. So, but generally, you've got individuals who are just they're gonna have that negative impact of doing cardio on their legs, especially if it's kind of low list cardio, low intensity, steady state. Some people can get away with that if they throw in high intensity interval training, and then they have to taper back their resistance training because that's going to do a better job as far as putting on muscle mass. You'll have, so to speak, legs that look more like a sprinter. That's not everyone. So if you're someone who really has a negative effect from doing cardio in terms of holding on to size or gaining size, like say you have an off-season cardio, then going with NEAT and counting steps is going to make much more sense.
Yeah.
Right. Now, then there's also, you got to do what you got to do to get in shape. Right.
Yeah.
So if you're someone with a metabolism that is saying like, okay, we're not going below 8%. We're not getting shredded glutes. This is not something I want to do. And you're already down low in calories because that's just the way your body guards your set point in terms of body fat. You're going to need to expend those calories relative to what you're eating to create the deficit. You may have a little more metabolic slowdown. You may not even you may unknowingly be just moving around a lot less.
Yeah.
The step counting helps, but like just the movement. It's interesting. I've got my Oura ring gives me my activity profile for the day, and there are days when I'm like out. Which is literally days when I go grocery shopping and I do. Just running around town, and I don't even know what I didn't set it up. It's some arbitrary preference that was in there as far as what my activity goal is for the day. And those days when I'm just out running errands, I will meet that goal sometimes like 2:00.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, like really early. It's like, okay, but that's just because I got up and I went grocery shopping and I picked something else up and I did various things. And I'm walking around, but I don't have the sense. I didn't really expend a lot of calories. Then there are days when I actually work out and I train legs, I expend a lot of calories, and I don't even get halfway to my goal until maybe 5:00, 6:00.
No kidding.
And I do a bunch of other things. If I go and I work in my garage now or in my barn, and like yesterday I was sawing a bunch of stuff and I was cutting through shit and like doing really some strenuous work. It doesn't show up because it's just measuring movement. So you're doing isometric contractions.
Oh.
It doesn't get counted. So the things that you do during the day, this is why just the steps are one way to keep things sort of stable, but your energy expenditure is not going to be perfectly tracked by your watch or your phone necessarily. And even this is the problem with these accelerometers, which are basically how these are working, and it picks up on your relative movement through the day.
Okay.
You could literally just put if you really wanted to trick the system, just leave your phone here, sitting there, put your hand with your Oura on the counter, and then just kick your legs and go like this all day long, right?
Right.
You could spend a whole bunch but nothing's moving in this hand. That would be a really bizarre movement pattern.
Yeah.
So the underlying assumptions that are used to create the algorithms that give you an energy expenditure estimate can be fooled, and there can be some gross inaccuracies.
Yeah.
Which you have to account for. So some people, back to the topic, some people diet down and they just stop moving around. They just they take more naps, which can be a very good thing, but this energy expenditure is in there. So they make up for that by doing a bunch of cardio. And there's actually some studies, like one particular study in older folks, where they looked at energy expenditure the best way they measured it. And when they added cardio, they were so tired that they moved around less. They just rested the rest of the day, and their energy expenditure was actually less.
No kidding. I could see that, man.
Yeah.
And I could see that in myself. By the way, I have two stories to share later when we're done with this topic. Funny stories I've heard about or Ring or Apple Watch or step counters that were kind of, well, funny and bad, but that makes sense. And you know what, man? I remember in like my last contest preps, times that I really would just sit there, like, because your energy gets so low that you end up, you do your cardio, but then you just sit there and you don't move. Like energy goes down. Yeah. So I wonder if fat burners that do provide energy, pre-workouts, things like that, I wonder if, they aren't directly burning fat, but I'm thinking to myself like, man, if that stuff's getting you to move around more,
Absolutely.
I wonder if that in itself is a fat burner then.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they're going to shift you to using more fat because they're sympathomimetic in some way. So they're turning on fat use. It could also cause more glycogen use, but that's not a problem if you're just moving around.
Yeah.
I can use a lot of glycogen with just normal day-to-day things. Weight training is a different story.
Yeah.
But so then that actually is a great segue to this other thing that happens with cardio that you won't necessarily get when you're just counting steps or doing day-to-day things, is you have a training effect. And this is sort of the thing that might account for why cardio works really well for some people.
Yeah.
Is that you shift your metabolism towards the use of fat in a couple of different ways, at least. And if you're someone who can hold on, let's say you have a good ability to gain muscle, probably means you have a good ability to retain muscle, especially in your legs. You might be able to do lots of cardio, which will reduce the glycogen levels. That will tend to shift the fuel that you use towards fat. Fuel oxidation is a function of what's available. So if you have like zero glycogen, you don't have any carbohydrate available. You're not going to pull a bunch of glucose from your blood because you go hypo, and your brain wouldn't like that a whole lot. So if you got no carbs coming in, you got no carbs in the muscle cell, you're going to use fat. That's just how it is. So doing cardio tends to reduce the glycogen levels during the cardio and just during the entire day. That means more fat is being oxidized, generally speaking. And the other thing that can happen, of course, with cardio is that you get a training effect, more mitochondria, and then you just have simply a better ability to oxidize fat. So, you kind of turn yourself into a better fat oxidizer because you train the body to oxidize more fat and utilize fat by doing the cardio.
What do you mean more mitochondria? What does that mean?
The mitochondria are the quote unquote powerhouses of the cell. So they're the organelles that are responsible for aerobic respiration or oxidative phosphorylation. So when you bring glucose in, or you use glycogen, or fatty acids are oxidized for fuel from fat, either that you've eaten or that it's been removed from it's been taken out of your fat cells. For those to be used aerobically where oxygen is involved, the mitochondria is where that all happens.
Okay.
So fat use is purely an aerobic phenomenon, happens in the mitochondria. So more mitochondria means you can use more fat. And the more trained people at any exercise level or walking around, the more aerobically trained you are, the more mitochondria you have, the relative intensity is less in this case. So you take someone like who's completely untrained. Let's take like the two ends of the spectrum, and you're going to put them on do an exercise test on a cycloergometer, and their VO2 max is low, and they can't really go very hard. You get them to 100 watts, or 150 watts, 125 watts on the exercise bike, and they're like, oh shit, they're near the lactate threshold. They're really pushing. They're hurting because they're untrained and they don't have mitochondria to oxidize things. They need to go tap into their glycogen. They're not going to use much fat at all because it's really, really hard. It's very intense for them. Now you take Lance Armstrong, someone who's really trained, or someone maybe who's a bodybuilder who's also aerobically trained, and put them on 150 watts on the bike, and they're not even breathing hard. It's so easy. So the intensity is low, and they can oxidize fat as a predominant fuel source because fat can only be oxidized very slowly. But it's like nothing. The intensity is really low.
Yeah.
So everything in terms of the relative intensity and thus the fuel sources that you use becomes lighter, easier, and more fat-oriented the more trained you get. So the more trained, aerobically trained person will use more fat at any given exercise intensity or any given walking speed or just in the day-to-day going about your business types of activities, your day-to-day activities of daily living. So you might end up making yourself a better fat oxidizer in this situation, especially when you're like a month out and your body's like, no, I want to break down protein. I don't want to use fat. Having more fat available, having more mitochondria there to oxidize fat could make you a better fat burner. And here's the thing about doing morning cardio.
Yes, fasted
cardio. So like I said, this is a little insight into this is basic exercise physiology. You use the fuel that's available. So, and some of that fuel selection is a function of insulin. So insulin is when you eat carbs, you get insulin goes up. And if you eat carbs before, or you've got carbs in your system, you've got insulin in your system because you've eaten something, you've eaten meals previous, you do your cardio at the end of the day, let's say, you've just had a meal an hour beforehand. This is where people talk about the fat burning zone. Because of those carbs being available, and insulin is basically telling your cells that you'll use more carbs just because the insulin is there. And even if we're a given glycogen level, you'll have more insulin from the previous meals, and the effects of insulin linger for a long time. So you'll use more carbs. So what you're doing when you're getting a training effect during that afternoon cardio or late day cardio is you're basically training and using carbs during your training. So you're training your cells to use carbs.
Yeah.
Now let's imagine you wake up in the morning and haven't had anything to eat for 8-10 hours. You're post-absorptive.
Okay.
And your insulin levels are low. Now, just because of being fasted, you're going to use more fat during morning cardio. So here's what people say. It doesn't matter. You spend 200 calories in the afternoon and it's all carbs. You spend 200 calories in the morning, it's all fat. Like it would never be all or none. You're like, yeah, but those are all fat carbs. It's like, yeah, but it all fat calories, but it all matters how many calories all in all work out. You can't deny that law of thermodynamics. But, and they've seen this in some of the endurance, for a while they were investigating this. If you can train yourself to be a better fat oxidizer by training with a low carb, low insulin environment. So just to get a little bit off topic, in the endurance realm, carbohydrate was going to limit your performance when you're doing really long endurance stuff. This is why marathon runners will bonk. They run out of carbs, run out of glycogen. They have to slow down to some degree. So if you can train your cells to use more fat, that spares glycogen. So there are lots of studies where they get people fat adapted. So they do actually have higher levels of the beta oxidative enzymes for fat oxidation, and they become a better fat burner. Problem is they can't train it so hard that way. But you can train yourself to be better at oxidizing fat if you train when you're using fat as a fuel, right? It's like, you want to get better at driving a Ferrari? Well, then you drive a Ferrari. If you want to get better at driving a giant 4x4 monster truck, then you drive a 4x4 monster truck. You want to get better at oxidizing fat during exercise, then you exercise in a situation where you have to oxidize fat, which is fasted cardio. So you could make yourself, in addition to just becoming a better fat oxidizer by being more aerobically trained, you can amplify that effect potentially by doing fasted cardio, where you are oxidizing more fat. Calorically speaking, it's like, you still have to have the deficit. But all in all, that deficit could come more so from fat. If you're potentially, this is the mechanism that I'm thinking that might explain why some people seem to find that morning cardio, one physiological mechanism why morning cardio might help them, and that they just have a better capacity to oxidize fat because they've trained their system to do that by doing cardio, and in particular, secondarily, by doing cardio in the fasted situation where they oxidize fat primarily, just turning yourself into a fat burning machine.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I've seen in my own life fasted cardio making a difference. Like it was interesting because Dusty and I both had said that because you hear people who say, and there's studies to show it doesn't matter what time you do it, which is true. Like doing your cardio is going to be a lot more beneficial than not doing your cardio at all. And I would say logistics come in. You know what I mean? Like maybe it doesn't make sense for somebody to do fasted cardio because they have to be to work at 4:30 in the morning and they're, getting up at 3:30 or whatever. Maybe that doesn't make sense for their life and they'd be better off getting extra sleep. But yeah, when it does make sense, I have seen it make a difference in my life and people that I've worked with.
Yeah, I mean, you take an untrained population and you put them in a caloric deficit with diet and the cardio, like you're going to get a pretty powerful fat loss effect because they're presumably coming from their set point or settling point in terms of body fat.
Yeah.
The more body fat you have, the faster you lose it, generally speaking. It's not the same situation when you're at 6% and you're trying to get to 4.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're having to battle tooth and nail to do everything you possibly can. So that cardio forces that caloric expenditure, which might not be there. You might have, back to the steps versus cardio thing, or the NEAT versus cardio thing, if you just count your steps, but you're a zombie, like, okay, I got my 10,000 steps in, and then you go home and just sit down and you just watch the paint dry on your walls, right? You're not expending any energy, right?
Yeah.
You got those 10,000 steps in, but that doesn't encompass all of your NEAT. But if you're adding cardio in, then you're ensuring at least that block of energy expenditure that's there.
Yeah.
And then the other important thing that, that's mentioned all the time is you start your day off in the right way. If you get up in the morning, do fasted cardio, or you do your cardio.
Yeah.
One, you tend to reduce your appetite, like after training. Even when I'm this is true for lots of people, even when I'm all the way dieted down, if I train really hard, I'm not hungry after workout.
Yeah.
You're just kind of like so beat. So you get up in the morning and do your fasted cardio, and maybe you just have, some amino acids or a protein. I'd suggest a whole protein meal, but, and you missed eating. You might wake up, you don't do your cardio. It's like, well, you have a meal in there. So you basically have taken maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours of your day when you don't eat. All right. And you've done something instead of eating where you got calories going in, you've got calories going out. And that means you condense the period of the day when you're trying to deal with your hunger, and you're totally focused on food, thinking about the next meal that's coming in, because you've bypassed those 2 hours. And I really think, I haven't seen this study directly, but I really think that there's something to say for, this is maybe one reason, although it doesn't pan out in the studies as well, having more meals throughout the day can be effective because you're not in that like, oh my God, I'm so fucking hungry, I could eat the donkey's ass, right? You're like just starving. That creates a stress reaction. It can be psychological,
yeah,
right? And cortisol is not your friend for holding on to muscle mass.
Interesting.
Yeah. So if you got that coming in, it makes sense with the protein timing aspect. Protein's anti-catabolic, anabolic, etc. But just knowing you got another meal coming in keeps you out of that, like, oh shit, I don't get to eat for 2 hours, and right now I'm just totally stressing, and I'm getting anxious. It's like, nope, I'm gonna have a meal. I'll take the edge off. I think repeatedly taking that edge off over the course of 4, 5, 6 weeks when you're getting close to being in contest condition, that means less cortisol. And we know from the intra-workout studies, there's a study I talk about often that Tar Penning did in like 2000, 2001, and they just gave carbs during an intra-workout, and those carbs blunted the cortisol release during the training. And cortisol is a steroid hormone. It has a long-acting effect. Binds to a nuclear receptor, just like testosterone does, like other steroid hormones do. And by blunting, they looked at the extent to which cortisol was blunted, or the elevations in cortisol across all their subjects.
Yeah. And
the lower the cortisol, the higher the muscle growth over the course of the resistance training regime, like 8 or 12 weeks.
We were just going to talk about this on the next Blood, Sweat, and Gear, too. A topic came up, the idea of we're going to discuss, like, what are the benefits of an intra-workout? I feel like we're naturally kind of evolving this conversation. I don't know how much more you have to say about cardio, but I feel like there's a natural step to another conversation here. If there's anything else you wanted to mention about cardio, let's do that. But that could be a cool direction to go with this conversation next.
I'll just say this. That's the thing that's interesting to see with morning cardio.
Yeah.
When you exercise and when you don't have any incoming insulin, and amino acids have a little bit of this effect too. It's not to the same extent, but carbs for sure will blunt that cortisol release. So those things I just mentioned about cardio may play a role. And then another factor about being fed versus fasted is that if you're exercised, so you go all out of your cardio, you're going to elevate your cortisol. So we don't know about this in terms of holding on to muscle size or in that last month or two as far as cardio goes. But in this study by Tar Penning, when they were gaining muscle mass,
Yeah.
And they included just carbs. It was about 50 grams. It's actually Gatorade that they used, and ended up being about 50 grams for their average subjects.
Okay.
They had various, to varying extent, there was suppression of cortisol, but it was basically on average just down to nothing.
Huh.
Some people had more cortisol release without the Gatorade, some had less, and they lumped all their subjects together and they looked at the extent to which cortisol was elevated. This was resistance exercise.
Okay.
And how much, or how extent to which cortisol was suppressed, either way you want to look at it, and type 1 muscle fiber growth and type 2 muscle fiber growth.
Okay.
And the lower the cortisol, the greater the muscle growth.
Huh.
And that was just from using an intra-workout 50 grams of carbs.
Interesting.
And the reason why that would make sense is that without that cortisol release, which is pretty substantial in exercise, it's there to foster gluconeogenesis, to make sure that you've got glucose available for the brain. It's just a normal stress hormone response, just like epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol.
So the cortisol triggers that so that you can create gluconeogenesis to. I'm just trying to restate that for my own.
Sure.
So that's the reason, though. That's the reason of the cortisol, is so that you can produce glucose for your brain from protein.
Yeah.
While you're training.
Various things that are involved. Yeah, that's one of it. It upregulates an enzyme called, if people want to geek out, phosphoenolpyruvate carboxykinase in the liver,
Okay.
and that leads to gluconeogenesis. And it's sort of the evil cousin to insulin, right? So,
Okay.
or one of them. You can insulin, and long story there. I'm not going to go off on that tangent, but if you take carbs in, you don't get the insulin release. The cortisol relief. You get an insulin release, you don't get the cortisol release.
You don't need the cortisol release because you've taken the carbs in. So
you've got
directly,
carbs, right?
You're bypassing, you're hacking your needs for your brain.
Absolutely, and that's what bodybuilding's a biohack anyway. So you do, in this case, the resistance training. You take the carbs in, and I think they did it before and immediately after, but they looked at the cortisol elevation during the course of the exercise.
Yeah.
And area under the curve. The extent to which you kept cortisol low, the greater the fiber growth. And here's the thing: that cortisol, because it's a long-acting hormone, steroid hormone, its effects are going to linger for hours, like 12, 18, 24 hours after an exercise bout.
No kidding.
So yes, that massive elevation is something which probably for an evolutionary reason, it's like, okay, you went out, you chased something down, you didn't get any food afterwards, right? You're hunting and gathering, you didn't find anything, but you exerted yourself. We got to make sure the brain's okay, so you can keep your wits about you. Yeah. And hunt another day or gather another day. But if you hunted and gathered and you found something and you don't get the cortisol release. Let's say you go out and you capture whatever and you find some berries you eat. Well, then the cortisol is not needed because you found some food, you found some nourishment, so your brain's happy-go-lucky.
That makes sense.
So, and that cortisol then hours afterwards would be providing glucose by breaking down protein, having its catabolic effect to make sure your brain's happy. You lose, 8, 10, 12 ounces of muscle, and the next day it's okay if your brain's working because eventually you can find something to keep you up and running. Yeah. For bodybuilders, it's not what we want. So preventing that cortisol elevation has an impact on protein balance. This is just, I had to kind of piece this together because people haven't measured the protein balance out that far that I've seen in the literature. Okay. In the exercise science literature. But preventing that cortisol release, definitely the correlations were like 0.7, 0.8. I think it was like 0.82 or 0.85. That's a really strong correlation it was an inverse correlation between cortisol and type 1 and type 2 fiber growth. Huh. So back to cardio then, one of the things that could play a role with morning capacity cardio is if you have a big cortisol release, that could work against you. Yeah. Okay. So one thing that could make sense, this is why some people may find they have better success with essential amino acids, because that will blunt the cortisol release a little bit. It does, not the same way as carbs, but it will have a somewhat of an impact, potentially. Or have your meal right afterwards. Yeah. So you do your cardio, maybe you get the fat training effect from cardio. This is totally wild ass guesses. This is just me speculating because it's fun to do as a physiologist, right? Okay. But you get the training effect because you train without the carbs, and then you do your best to limit the cortisol because you don't just run around fasted the entire time. Yeah. You take your carbs in, you do a post workout, or maybe you do your cardio fasted beforehand before you train in the morning,
Okay.
and you can get that. They can get that effect. You'll turn on those genes potentially. Who knows what the timing? How the timing matters there. And then you maybe use an intra-workout while you're training.
Yeah.
Because carbs during your intra-workout can actually foster. Actually has performance potential. It's an ergogenic. Can have an ergogenic effect.
Sure.
Yeah. Even if you're not glycogen depleted.
What about I've heard of this. We've talked about it before on Blood, Sweat, and Gear, and I remember you and you and Jordan had a conversation about this once, obviously years ago, using a low dose of insulin fasted before cardio.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that? And let me also say that that's not something that either of us are suggesting anybody goes out and tries, because I feel like that could end up really bad, especially for somebody that doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah. There's a couple different scenarios where someone would do that. Some people, if your glucose does go down, that will foster more fat oxidation.
Right.
Right. And what would typically happen there is you'd have a low glucose would tell the brain we need to provide some fuel to actually get some cortisol release too, along with that. And then you'd have more fat oxidation. So lower glucose does tend to mean more fat oxidation. Now, if you've lowered your glucose with insulin, exogenous insulin usually goes down during exercise. And that allows glucose to be available for the brain. So you want to have less insulin around because you don't want to be taking up blood glucose into skeletal muscle cells.
Okay.
You double, triple your blood flow to skeletal muscle because you're exercising. That means you're doubling or tripling the delivery of insulin to those skeletal muscles.
Huh.
So insulin's action is going to, if insulin just stays the same, insulin's action is going to go way up. That's going to pull the glucose into the skeletal muscle cells to be oxidized. So you don't want that. You want the opposite to happen.
Yeah.
So that's normal exercise regulation. Insulin goes down. You don't draw the blood glucose into your skeletal muscle cells. You leave it available for the brain to use. Now, if you take insulin, a little bit of insulin, and you reduce your glucose, the thinking would be, well, glucose goes down, fat oxidation goes up. It's like, well, okay. And this is where, I haven't seen anyone do this. It'd be kind of a dangerous thing. But one, we know that insulin inhibits lipolysis. So insulin isn't going to, if you got elevated insulin levels because you've jacked it up artificially, you're going to tend to limit your fat oxidation.
Yeah.
Potentially. So that's not going to help your cause.
Huh.
If your glucose goes so low that you start to get actually hypo, and anyone who's gone hypo from insulin use, let's say, or just in general, like you get this massive sympathetic response, you start sweating,
it's not fun.
Et cetera. Yeah, that's not fun at all. And that would then trigger more lipolysis because you're basically in a blood glucose crisis state. And that's not probably the smartest way to go about doing all this. The other thing that some people I know have had it's helped them with, and this makes sense because your body is is pretty resilient. Is if you're and not that it fucking matters so much, pardon my French, but people who are doing like ketogenic diets, they want to get into ketosis as fast as possible. There's some evidence that just there's inefficiencies in oxidizing ketones. You make ketones and then you oxidize them again, so this back and forth. It's kind of like it's excess movement of substrate. So you oxidize, maybe less than 100 extra calories a day if by being in a deep state of ketosis. So people were looking for that, like that's the magic of ketosis. But really, the magic of ketosis are low carbs. Is that for many people your appetite's really low. Yeah. So people who doing like a cyclical ketogenic diet, they would be in ketosis throughout the week, and then they carb up like a mofo, and then they want to get back into ketosis as soon as possible. Yeah. And if you've just carved up and take it in massive, eating like bags of bagels and just all that you could think of, your glycogen levels are full, your liver glycogen levels are full, your insulin levels are high, your insulin sensitivity's maybe gone down a tad. It makes sense because your glycogen levels are filled up. And it's going to take you a couple days to get into ketosis. Those ketogenic enzymes in the liver seem to be upregulated, and they stay upregulated for a while. It's kind of cool, and I'll tell you how I kind of know that, or why I suspect that at least. There's probably Dominic D'Agostino probably can tell you 15 studies that support or refute this idea, because he's the ketosis guru. But so people would, when they're getting ready to get off, stop the carb load, and they want to get back into ketosis, there are people who would, and again, not suggesting this, but it would work for them. They would do cardio like Sunday night and use a little bit of insulin to bring their glucose down, and it would push them a little bit into hypoglycemia or getting closer, and that would foster ketogenesis. And then they wake up the next day in ketosis. They're not going like overtly hypo and like, oh my God, they're like just shaking around the room, having an episode.
Yeah.
But that would help some people turn on and sort of restart that ketogenesis. But they would take in no carbs afterwards. So that seemed to work. Something about the combination of those two things. And then they wake up the next day and they're in ketosis, so they're not hungry. So it's easy to go right back to their diet. It helps sort of switch hormonally and metabolically into the ketosis, so it helps them with their brain. They pee on their keto sticks. Like, okay, I've got ketonuria at least.
They feel better.
Yeah, ketonemia. Yeah, exactly. And they're back in it. So they would just flip that switch.
Yeah.
People would do that, but I don't know. Like, that's the thing. I would love to see someone. You have to be kind of tough to find a rationale because it's just bodybuilder stuff, but if you use insulin to reduce your glucose, which, lower glucose meaning more fat oxidation, yeah, that's true. But when you've elevated your insulin to bring the glucose down, you've also elevated insulin, which means you've reduced fat oxidation.
Yeah. So
you're maybe just totally shooting yourself in the foot. But the placebo effect's a powerful effect too. Huh. So, sometimes you just like to do as much shit as you can. Like, I'm dotting every I and crossing every T, and I got my mojo working. So you keep doing that. You do everything perfect. If you feel like you're excelling because you're doing the shit the other guy isn't doing, then that feeds into itself, and your mentality is like, I'm not gonna miss a meal. I'm not gonna miss a step of cardio, whatever. And sometimes bodybuilders do that. It's they self perpetuate their own disciplined style of going about the prep by doing all the shit, like everything. Right. Whether it works or not. I don't know if morning cardio works, but goddamn it, I'm going to get up, rise and grind, and I'm going to do that shit.
Yeah.
And that feeds into a positive attitude, which is worth it, in many cases.
I thought of something else, and I think that's where Andrew Nolan was going. And by the way, shout out to everybody who's watching live, to Matt, and thank you for supporting us on Patreon, Lucas and Brian and Andrew Nolan. So I think this is what Andrew Nolan's getting at. He says, what if we were to use oral PEDs? When I was working with Matt Porter, he had me chewing anavar 45 minutes pre-fasted cardio under 30-minute sessions, and taking EAAs and 20 grams of carbs, last 10 minutes of cardio, if longer than 30 minutes. And what I kind of wanted to tie in with that was, my thought was, you were talking about the issues that you can have from cortisol training. My question would be, I actually, what I think a lot of people will say on YouTube is, well, that maybe affects somebody who's natural, but what about if you're on PEDs?
So boom. It's funny, Matt keeps on coming up. I miss that guy. He
was a great mind in our industry. He really was.
We had a conversation at the Arnold Classic, which is one of my favorite conversations. Like, we stood there for like 2 hours, and finally he had to go because he was neglecting all of his athletes and stuff. But so gear is going to blocks the cortisol receptor.
Yeah.
Right. Matt knew this. It's probably why he was having him do that, because you're basically, you can use a pre-workout anavar or whatever oral someone might be using, because it has the psychological effect. It's good as a literally a pre-workout to stimulate, get you up and running.
Yeah.
And same thing with cardio. If you're doing hard cardio, like, it's not necessarily the most exciting thing. You're not enthused to get on there and do that. So it has that psychoactive effect. But also it's going to have an anti-cortisol effect and an anabolic effect, of course, too.
Yeah.
And the second thing in his question there, he had EAAs and carbs during that last 10 minutes. There's a gastric delay, especially when you're exercising. So that was a timing scenario. I presume that's what Matt was doing.
That makes sense.
This is why, like you're still oxidizing fat. It's going to take a while for that to get in your system, And right when you literally you're letting that into the system right when you stop your cardio, your insulin's going up, and you're blunting any cortisol as much as possible. So he's blunting it during the workout without having an effect on insulin. With the gear, essentially, just thinking of through the lens of cortisol now.
Right.
And then he's blunting it right afterwards by making sure you're providing amino acids and cortisol, which does have a better effect. You can get a synergy between essential amino acids or protein in general and carbs in terms of insulin. Couple studies. Zawadzki is a study that's, for instance, demonstrated that. So, yeah, he's doing that just because that's about like that 10 minutes makes good sense.
That's incredible. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. That's why I call it peri-workout recovery supplementation. You start that before you start training.
Yeah.
Like 15 minutes to get it into your system. You start drinking it like in your first, second set. You've the very act of doing the cardio or doing training. The sympathetic activation is the opposite of parasympathetic. It's the opposite of digestion.
Yeah.
So you're basically turning off those features. It's an unnatural act to take in food while you're exercising with a very high intensity.
Sure.
You don't like typically think I'm going to have a burger and fries while I'm doing squats.
Yeah. Unless you're at Planet Fitness, but that's another story.
Right. Then they're serving you pizza.
Right.
While you're doing knee extensions. But you're manipulating your hormones, which is what part of what bodybuilding is, natural or otherwise, more so in the otherwise. But so that's what Matt was doing, was trying to probably, I don't know if he was thinking about, maybe he was. I'm not going to underestimate Matt in any way, shape, or form. Maybe he was thinking about getting the fasted cardio effect. Maybe he wasn't thinking about enzymes per se, but keep the cardio fasted, but then prevent that negative catabolism that could come from not eating anything right after you work out, which holds true, I think, for training. You wake up in the morning and you weight train, you're like, okay, that's good. I'm going to go to work now, and I think I'll have some lunch 4 hours later. Right. That's probably a no-go. So, and this is the thing, and again, in this intra-workout talk that I'm doing on Thursday, and I mentioned this here before too, is it's only small little shifts in protein metabolism that make a huge difference over the long haul. At 7 grams per day of positive protein balance, assuming it all goes into skeletal muscle mass, means 28 grams, means about 1 ounce of new muscle mass a day. You do that 365 days in a year, and that's like 22.8 pounds of muscle in a year. So you eat 200 grams of protein and you only oxidize and replace with 193, and you get 7 grams. That's 28 calories. It's not a whole lot. It's a small shift. So you think about that situation when you're training, and you've got elevated breakdown during the training. Imagine the fasted situation, but you also got elevated synthesis. Yeah. So that's why training does what it does. It's a period of extremely high turnover in terms of protein synthesis. So if you take in carbs and protein during that time period, that's when you can most make a shift. And if it's only literally 2 grams of protein with a sizable intra-workout, that's maybe the size of one of your meals, as opposed to nothing and then waiting an hour until you get dressed and have a shower and then have your meal. And that just means 2 grams of 8 calories. Right? That's teensy, but 2 grams over the course of a year, you add that up and do the math. That 2 grams is 10 pounds of muscle mass. If that were every day, yeah. And if it's just the 4 days of the week you train, it's still 5 pounds of muscle mass, or 6 pounds. So it's little itty bitty things like throwing in your intra workout or your post workout after cardio, so it hits you right then, and adding those little itty bitty things together over the course of being consistent day in and day out, that turns people into monsters. You know?
I feel like some of us are missing that. I think that because the little things, those are it's easy to not see the difference in your day to day. And I think it's easy for us to say, oh, we don't need to do that. You just need to eat there's a lot of little things. I guess that to me, and I'm just speaking my own thoughts, just what I'm having right now in reaction to this, that I think that I watch what a lot of our audience is saying. I watch a lot of the attitudes and responses, and I almost feel like this is good for us to hear, that a lot of us could all be thinking a little bit more about those little things and about adding them up, you know?
Yeah. So on the one side, we have the research, which is largely just because you get a good effect with untrained people. And so like Brad Schoenfeld's, fasted cardio scenario, his study didn't really show any difference.
Yeah.
And when we talk about the one-legged study that I love to harp on, 5 times a week versus 2 times a week versus 3 times a week training, on average, it didn't make a difference. But you look at the individual responses, it did make a difference.
Yeah.
So we've got studies that show you the generalizability of a particular intervention, inter-workout versus no inter-workout or what have you. And they may show nothing. But within that, in the study, which is largely untrained individuals who aren't at 6%, and they're very short term, you may have some individuals who respond well and some who don't.
Sure.
So, and you wouldn't know that unless you tease out the individual responses and look and see, like, for this person, that's the nice thing about the one-legged study. You can't do an inter-workout unless you do a crossover. You can, you can't take an untrained person and start training them with an inter-workout and then go back in time and put them in the same space they were and then train them without the inter-workout or the other way around, right? But you can do a one-legged study like that and keep everything the same and train one leg one way and the other leg the other way.
Yeah.
You could do, and they do this with some of the inter-workout studies. You could do a study where you train one leg fasted in the morning and you train the other leg with an inter-workout after they fed throughout the day. Which would be very cool, right?
If you guys do that, make sure you do it with your weaker leg. Give your weaker leg the carbs.
Right. I mean, you do it yourself, but that'll be a great study to do. You just have to have them come back to the lab twice a day, and keep everything as close to the same as you possibly could. Some of the studies I'll talk about in this webinar, they look at the diet, and they see no difference between the groups in terms of the total calories we're taking in. But in one of the studies, for instance, they did a pre and post workout supplement, and they compared that with the same supplement taken in the morning and in the evening. Okay. So first thing of the day, end of the day. So it's far away from training. So the calories came in, but the timing itself made a difference. Everything else is exactly the same. It was just a function of whether they did or didn't have the workout, the intra-workout, period-workout, just before and after in place. That's one study. And that showed that effect. So the thing, and you can call it cherry picking, that totally makes sense. It is. I find the best studies because, you look at those circumstances, it tells you that it can possibly happen. And that tells you there's potentially something here, just like the study with 5 versus 3 versus 2 times a week. Yeah. The first study says this doesn't make a difference, right? So, but you look individually, it does make a difference. So if you find a study that does show a difference and the other studies don't, well, that shows that in that particular study, there was enough of a systematic difference amongst those subjects to find a difference. Yeah. Which tells that there's something there. So, take that information and then apply this sort of thing to, a bodybuilder who's trained. And so I'll go back. So we got the studies that show you, does it actually work out in the real world? And those studies, largely, you read the discussions, you read the foreword, the introduction information. There's some physiological principle. There's some rationale as to why we think this might happen. And you look at then the scenario with a competitive bodybuilder who's 6%. And it's like, can you imagine a study? It's like, okay, I want to take all you guys who are 4 weeks out, and we're going to start fucking around with your pre-contest. We're going to not let some of you take the intra-workout, which we suspect would help you hold on to muscle. And we're going to will you just sacrifice, yourself for the next? No one's going to do that. You're not going to. Of course not.
I want every edge I could possibly have. The only way I do the study is if I could be the guy with the supplements,
Right. And maybe after your show, you do something else. You crossover or what have you. But so you're left in the most cases to say, okay, we've got maybe some evidence from direct studies that suggest an effect like with the interwork. We actually have that. And we've also got the physiological principles, which is what Matt was probably working under. You're not going to get a study where they're like saying, chew your anavar before you do your cardio. No one's going to study that, right?
No, there's no study on that.
Or the timing, that sort of thing. But there's a reason, as we just talked about and explained, that those things might make sense. And over the long haul, here's the problem. Like with just the shift in 2 grams of protein balanced 4 times a week, that makes a difference in terms of 4 or 5 pounds of muscle.
Yeah.
Add that up, like purely mathematically. That shows up on the stage. Those are impressive gains.
Yeah.
Or impressive difference. That does pan out in the real world. But you have, in order to see that itsy bitsy effect, you'd have to study someone for a year, with and without. You just, those studies just are not, they're just improbable. You're just not going to do those sorts of things. So you have to rely upon the physiological principles, which Matt was doing, and then your practical, quote unquote, clinical experience. So this does seem to make a difference. And that's, this is a reason why, and not just like in terms of like Matt and John, like two guys. I don't know if Nick Ware's watching right now. He may have chimed in. He
was here earlier. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Nick and I were chatting. Was it yesterday? I think we were chatting, and he was talking, not to be morbid, but he's like, man, if I die, whenever, I'm hoping that, up in heaven, I can sit down with John and Matt and you, and we can just talk bodybuilding shit for days. Like, that'd be my sense of heaven. And that's why John and Matt were so good in particular, because they were also competitors. And there are certain things that, and I've done the same sort of thing. You test things out with yourself, and you have this personal level of experience. You can see when these things happen, and you have a good sense of what's working. That, you say you have five clients, and you say, like, take the anavar before your cardio, whatever.
Yeah.
And is it working? Well, there's a reason why they hired you as a coach, because they want you to do the figuring out, and they may not even want to think about what's going on.
Yeah.
But if you're the coach, if you're the actual client, or you're the actual athlete doing these things, then you actually are paying attention. You're seeing these things. So I would be Matt talked very openly about the things he did, and John did too, especially near the end there. But I'm sure that Matt actually tried that out himself, and he noticed, noticed something. Yeah.
Yep.
Or at least hypothesized. So these little things that you can see from a case study perspective doesn't mean it's going to happen for everybody. There's limitations to a case study, or just the one N of one, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it tells you that there's potential there. It may only work in 10-15% of the people. And the thing, talking back to intra-workout in general, and protein timing, what have you. The thing that is lost sometimes when you get online, if people are like, the studies don't support that, what have you. I also don't know of any studies, for instance, when it comes to fasted cardio, intra-workout, that says it works against you. Right? Is there a negative effect there? Right? Now, if you try to take in 1,500 calories during your workouts will probably be messed up. That's just sort of silly.
Yeah.
But let's say you employ 10 things, and only a handful of them maybe have some empirical support, and the other ones maybe do have something that may work, and none of those things have any reason. You have no evidence, scientific or otherwise, to think that they would have a negative impact.
Yeah.
But they all have either scientific support or theoretical underpinnings. 7 or 8 of them work, and they all inch you forward a little bit, because you're doing everything. You're dotting every I and crossing every T and turning every dial. Well, then you've turned a lot of dials.
Yeah, you have.
And then that adds up over time. That's why you see people who get better and better year in, year out, because they're turning all the dials, and they're bodybuilding 24/7. That's why it's considered a lifestyle and so difficult to do. It's not like lots of sports where you can maybe get away with not being a bodybuilder around the clock.
I think what I speculate is, because I have seen some pushback to being sure that you turn all those dials to get all the 0.25%. I think it might be because there are so many people that miss the foundations. You know what I mean? And that, I think that a lot of times people have been hitting home the point that you have to make sure you get that first 99% taken care of, the training, the optimal training, the continued, keep an eye on making sure that your training's the optimal training, optimal rest, optimal food, and optimal supplementation, and then those little percents. I think that might be, because I was thinking about why have I felt pushback, and I think that's why, because I have seen that where people are so focused on this peptide that might give me a little fraction of a percent, but they're missing the boat on the big picture,
Yeah, I mean, like, for instance, it was kind of big news years ago. Alan Aragon and Brad Schoenfeld came up with their protein timing review. And they looked, I think they did a bit analysis as well. And they only had, I think, like 19 studies, only 3 or maybe 4 of them were with trained individuals, but didn't seem to be like an anabolic window, so to speak, in those studies. but they only had 4 studies with trained individuals where it might make a difference. You've got such a dramatic effect. It's like you've got a ceiling effect with untrained individuals. It grows so well. That's why it's nice. You get a statistical effect because they grew, they got stronger, everything. They had an adaptation, but it's also maybe maxed out. So those little things don't make a difference because it's such a novel stimulus. It's like the first time, someone responds to gear really well, and they put on 30 pounds. A lot of it's water and fluff, but they just grow like weeds. It's like, so did it matter whether I had 10 grams of EAAs in my intra-workout or not? No, it doesn't make any difference. But in that particular meta-analysis, one thing they did is they looked at total protein intake, and there was in this case, talking about fundamentals, there was an effect that having more protein intake above like the 1.6 grams per kilogram, if I'm remembering correctly, made a difference. There was a kind of a middle point. Less than that wasn't enough. More than that was better. That's what we see from the literature. And there's another, SupportMAX is another resource from like 2008. Another meta-analysis showed the same thing. So if an intra-workout, for instance, allowed you to get above or was part of getting above that requisite protein intake that you need for growth, it made a difference. So it's not, and you see this too. It's like people are like, okay, like today you're out traveling or whatever, you got some life circumstances and you're in an off season, you're trying to gain and you need to get your calories in. And it's like, no, I need to have my rice and my chicken. Exactly. And you go someplace and you forget it. You leave it on the kitchen counter and you get that there and like, okay, I'm ready for my meal. Like, oh shit, I forgot all my meal. So you're at the county fair and all you have is like burgers, and you're like, I'm not going to eat then. So the whole day you don't eat anything because you're not on neighbor chicken and rice. It's like, no, you need the calories. Yeah. The basics need to happen. So if you put the icing before the cake, some of those finer details before the obvious, like you need the caloric excess, you could have a greasy burger maybe, and it's not going to kill you because you're trying to gain every single day. You're trying to keep the wheel moving forward. Yeah, people, and that's just fun, right? It's cool to like get all the bells and whistles out and try a supplement. Like, ooh, I got this crazy gain from this.
Absolutely.
And just like being consistent and eating when you don't want to, or like eating on the clock, or that's not as fun for everyone. So that's, I think, why we're always looking for a magic bullet, the golden solution. Yeah. Right. So. These things are not that, but they can be. They can be part of your basics. You bring your intra workout. The thing I suggest to people, because I've seen this a good bit, is, and this is important to stay with as far as intra workout goes. The point is to have the nutrition available during the workout. So you have protein and carbs basically, and you want to have that there for the insulin effects, for the anti-catabolic and the protein synthetic effects, for the potential ergogenic effects, maintaining glycogen levels that you come with the carbs. There's also potentially there's a mouth rinsing effect too. You can actually get an ergogenic effect just from rinsing with a sweet solution that you don't actually swallow.
We talked about that.
It happens in the brain.
Wasn't Chris Bearcat part of that? Some research with that? Yeah.
They were going to do that. I'm not sure if that ever came out. I don't know if they published that yet, but that was something we were going to do, or they were going to do, and I was going to at least look over the manuscript. I wasn't involved with the study, but we and I talked about it a good bit. So people do that, like, does it matter? And then you can figure something out by taking it out. Does it make a difference to me?
We should get him back on the show.
With it. We should. I can do that. I chat with Chris all the time.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. So, so those things, with the intra workout, if you eat an hour beforehand, you don't want to drink something during the workout because it's just not your thing, and you can get some food before and after, and you've got nutrients in the bloodstream. You're good to go. Problem solved. You're not going to see much from an intra workout. But if you're waking up in the morning and you otherwise wouldn't be eating until an hour after your workout, when you're on the train going to work or what have you, you're drinking a shake after you showered and shaved and everything else, it can make a difference because you're trying to fill nutrients in and push your body to do something it's not necessarily wanting to do. So, it's all situational, like most of these things are. No black and white, unfortunately.
Well, I did promise that I was going to share 2 stories that I heard, and they were about the step counting. It just random stories I had heard on a radio show where they were talking about people who were counting steps and basically doing things to. One woman was misleading her step counter by putting it. I guess she was having an affair with a guy around the block, and she was telling her husband that she was going out jogging, and she'd go to his house.
Oh shit!
And they literally put her phone or whatever device she had, her Fitbit, they would put it in the dryer and turn it on, and then go do what they wanted to do. And then when they're done, she pulled out of the dryer and go home. And it said she had all these steps.
Oh.
And then another couple,
dastardly.
the couple had synced their watches up or whatever. I can't remember what device they had. So, you know, Scott, you and I, we both have the Oura Ring. I'm sure that we could probably link ours up and we could compare stats and see who burnt more see who had more steps yesterday.
Right.
Well, I guess that he was consistently, his heart rate was consistently going up at like 2 a.m. when he should have been sleeping. She put it together. She's like, why was your heart rate up for 45 minutes between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. when you're supposed to be sleeping? And every Tuesday that happens. And the guy was like, I was cheating on you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so technology going to bite people in the butt, I guess.
Yeah, you know, it's something I've talked about with friends before who've kind of been in and out in the dating ringer. Yeah, is that a thing that to know, like a way to, like, especially nowadays, a way to sort of substantiate that you've got good trust with your significant other is when you can give her or him your phone.
Absolutely,
access it whenever you want.
Yeah,
because there's so much in there, right? Like you can hide so many things. It's like, it's basically you're just unlocking so much.
Yeah,
and they'll see if you're getting messages on social media from men or women, you know, unsolicited. They see who you're chatting with, like
absolutely.
Unless you like go and get a second phone, but that's something that you can You can just use that as like a marker for the extent to which you feel comfortable and trustful and open with someone. Is like what I feel would be okay just saying, here, honey, here's my phone. You can look at whatever you want because I have nothing to hide.
Yeah.
And I think it's an eye opener for some people because, especially it's a way I think for people who maybe haven't been successful in relationships. Because I mean, heck, we all have a costume we wear to some degree, unless you're enlightened, you know, we all are. Like I'm performing right now, right?
Absolutely.
I kind of get, you know, pretty animate when I'm talking about this shit anyway, but you know, I'm making sure that I've got a continuous flow of information because people are watching the podcast because they want to potentially learn something. So I'm in my teacher mode. Yeah. So we're always in every relationship and every social contact, we're always putting on different faces and those sorts of things.
Absolutely.
And with our most intimate ones, we tend to do that too. And I've had, I mean, we're not going to get it unless someone wants to know, but you know, I know that there are certain things that I've done and it was sort of brought into me from my family of origin. You know, that I would part of my value, my worth in relationship, just in general and in romantic relationship, was that I had the sense I had to be valuable in terms of I can help somebody. So I take on this helper role, the knight in shining armor role. Yeah. And so I would give and give and give and give and give. So that's just a personal insight that I figured out. So everyone does that to some degree in various relationships, unless you really, really worked. And point I'm getting at is that a really kind of cool way that you can kind of like put a litmus test to the extent to which you're actually just being yourself and being open and honest and just letting it all show to your significant other is like, just give them your phone.
Yeah. And
think about what would they see in there that might surprise them or that you wouldn't want them to see. Cause you're not even thinking like, gosh, I'm hiding that. Like they know that I'm, you know, in some certain Facebook group. Right? Oh, yeah. Why are you in that Facebook group? I didn't know that. You're DMing
some person or having some, you know.
Right.
You know what I think, and I think here's the thing is, my thought is, you know, if you're doing something that you don't think is right, if you don't think it's right, then it probably doesn't sit with your own personal code. And if you're not following your own personal code, then you're not in a, you know, you're not living your life the way you want to be living it. And so it's a good thing to consider, you know. But get yourself in a position where you're comfortable with sharing your phone, and whether they look at it or not, you know, because we could go into so much with that. Because then if you have a significant other that's constantly wanting to check your phone and prove, you know, that you're not messing around, then that's a problem too, right?
And there's a trust issue, But I think the thing that I totally agree with what you said is like that's super important. If you know you're doing shit you shouldn't be doing, then okay, there's an issue there. But sometimes I think because you've been in this pattern, you don't even recognize that. So imagine you're actually giving your significant other their phone and thinking from their perspective, what would they see? Because you're busy doing this and you're going about it, and somehow in your head you rectified it. Like you're not probably walking around with just overburdened with guilt, or you wouldn't keep on doing it, right? But if they caught you, then you have shame. Yeah. So guilt is sort of internal, like I know I shouldn't be doing this, but shame is like some shame on you for doing that. Someone else is. So you can imagine like what that shame might be coming from your partner, your mom, like, or whatever, someone who's, you know, an outside authority figure, or someone who you want to be doing the right thing in their eyes. Yeah. And then it's kind of a nice, like, okay, shit, that's a really good litmus test. I recognize that I shouldn't be doing that. Or you know, the way I interact, like, I think women tend to do this more so than men. It's a societal thing. This isn't bashing on women, but women often want to have the outside attention from men, just as a way of sort of boosting their self-esteem. And bodybuilding men do this too. Yeah, we do. Men do it too. Yeah. So yeah. So you get like, imagine a guy who's got like women just, you know, creeping into his DMs, sliding into his DMs, and he's interacting with them, you know, but unnecessarily. Like he's just like having this perpetual, and like none of it's gone overtly sexual. But it's an emotional infidelity. Yeah. Because he's riding on that. He's getting all this attention, you know, and he's having like this like hidden, the secret friendship with a female. It's like, so who is this person? Right. Yeah. I think that happens sometimes innocently, and then it does become an actual true infidelity. But so those sorts of things that you don't necessarily recognize, I think that people, and I'm speaking from myself too, like just what are the things that I do that I might do? And I ran myself through this filter a long time ago, so I don't have anything to hide. I'm not in a relationship right now, but it's a good filter to apply. It's like, what about my online life, my phone life, my hidden life is something that I wouldn't want my best friend or someone who I want to be doing the right thing in their eyes because I care about them. What about that behavior would be looked at with a little bit of a strange eye if they knew about it. Yeah. And you know what, too? It's surprised. Like, my thought on it is that I'm just going to kind of almost repeat what I said before, was that if you're not okay with that, then you're not, if you're not okay with that, then you're not living the life that you're not living by your own code. And I feel like that's what leads us to unhappiness, is not living by our own code. So who cares what other people would think, you know? But if you feel like you're doing something wrong, then don't change it so that you don't get caught. My thought is change it so that you're living by the code that you stand by, and that's kind of, to me, what like feeling like you're living a good life is about. Yeah. Get right with the Lord, y'all. No, I just kidding on that part. But and I think people by applying the phone rule, they can evaluate themselves, their own behavior, exactly like you said, in a way that they're unaware of. I think people are like, they don't know, they're not sure what they're up to because they're just doing all this and they see it as sort of innocent, and then they're thinking of it the phone like, oh shit, okay, that feels like I get it now. I see why I shouldn't be doing that, because you imagine what the other person would say, and it's a way to reflect upon your own behavior. That is a really, because I mean, I'm trying to think, like, I can imagine, I know some couples, I know some people who are like, so what would your significant other think if they saw your phone? Saw what you're up to? Like, I'd never let them see that. Like, really? Well, okay, but people just want to hide it, right? Yeah, it depends on, I guess, where you're at. You know, Victoria and I both have each other's passwords, and I don't have anything to hide from her. But I could see at another point in our relationship, not that I had something to hide, but like not being there yet. There's a level of trust, you know, that also comes with that, you know. So it's a measuring stick in that sense too. Like, you know where you are. Yeah. So I think it's just useful. It's not like condemning or what have you. It's just a useful thing to think about. It's like, okay, it's a way of stepping outside your own box and evaluating from the outside.
Nick Weary was with us, by the way. Nick Weary was with us, and Andrew Nolan had said if you have kids, they will get into your phone and your browser history. So watch out for that. We are out of time, Scott. We've gone over an hour already. We didn't even need any questions, did we? We had we needed was just a match. That's all.
Just press start on the ramble box, and I just.
That was good, man. It was good. It gave me a lot to think about. I'm sure it's going to give a lot of people stuff to think about, both from the cardio aspect, the intra aspect, thinking about our food timing, because that's another one that comes up, you know, thinking about like, you don't need to eat 6 meals a day. You can do it in 3. I mean, maybe you can, but you know, you bring up some reasons why that could be beneficial to spread your food out. And you know what? All those little knobs, turning those little knobs too, man. That's I think a good important reminder for all of us. There's a lot of good stuff in this podcast.
Yeah, I just imagine someone misunderstanding and posting. Got my pre-workout setup, and like there's anavar tabs and a little insulin syringe. Like, here we go. Yeah,
this is what Scott Stevenson suggested.
No.
This is what Scott Stevenson said. He's a steroid advocate, after all. You remember that?
That's it, right? That's true. True, right? I've talked about it, you know? Yeah. Everyone should be. Like, housewives, children, like, everybody. There's not a population.
It should be a
universal. Yeah.
All right, guys.
Put them in, you should be eating for cereal. Like, pour some milk on and Diana Bits. That's what you should be having for breakfast.
Diana Bits Nation. There you go, hashtag.
There you go.
Guys, for another episode of Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson. Guys, you can learn so much more from Scott from his book. You can go to byobbcoach.com, check his book out there, or go to Amazon, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, and check out our sponsors. Like I said, True Nutrition has a whole new website, so head over there, check it out. You can get your intra-workout carbs there. In fact, you can take your carbs 10 minutes before your cardio is done, a la Matt Porter. In fact, you can get MPA muscle intrusion, Matt Porter approved muscle intrusion, from True Nutrition. Delicious tasting, highly branched cyclic dextrin and EAA blend. Use our code THINK. We're also brought to you by supplementsource.ca for our Canadian folk. And we're brought to you by STROM Sports Nutrition, of course, in the UK. And of course, we are brought to you by you guys at Patreon. I really appreciate everybody at Patreon because, I can't depend on YouTube ad revenue. They just don't come through for me, but Patreon does. You guys are awesome. Yeah. All right. Scott, I appreciate you as always, man.
Likewise. Peace.